On the Republican side, there's obviously universal opposition to this, but I'm wondering what would be, or is there kind of a Republican policy agenda response to what's going on? What are the issues that are legitimate issues that are being considered, but there are things that Republicans would suggest doing in a different way?
Well, I could say I worked in the Senate for 6 years. Tori worked in the Senate a long time too, and so I know she's gonna see this. And even today I talk to Republican lawmakers and staffs virtually every day, and Republican lawmakers fully understand that the long-term budget is unsustainable. They fully understand that Social Security and Medicare are driving it and need to be reformed, but they are terrified to talk about it. And they're absolutely even more terrified to put out a plan to address this. I think if Republicans were asked in their heart of hearts, what would you do to fix the budget? They would say, reform Social Security and Medicare. On Social Security, raise the eligibility age, pare back benefits for the wealthy. On Medicare, raise the premiums that wealthy seniors pay, maybe bring in more choice and competition into the Medicare system to rein in costs, and then hold the line on other programs. You can't balance the budget through the other programs, but I think a lot of Republicans would say limit the growth and get rid of waste elsewhere. But they won't talk about this publicly for several reasons. Number one, when you're in the opposition, you don't need to give a solution. That's the politics we are always told about. When you're in the opposition, keep the focus on why the majority is bad, and don't give up your own proposal, because that could foster disagreement. Just keep throwing bombs. So that's the first reason they won't do it, because it's easier to be the party of no than the party of here's our solution. The second reason they won't is because Republicans cut taxes in 2017. And every time they talk about deficits, the first question asked to them by reporters or Democrats is, if you're so concerned about deficits, why don't you start by repealing your darn tax cuts? And Republicans that I talk to get so sick of being called out on what is fairly called a hypocritical activity, a hypocritical policy. For as much as I like a lot of the tax cuts policies, there is some deficit hypocrisy there. They're so tired of being called out on the hypocrisy that they just stop talking about deficits because they don't want to repeal the tax cuts. And the third reason Republicans don't talk about it is because Social Security and Medicare reform, which they understand would have to lead, is extraordinarily unpopular. There was a poll in 2016 that said only 15% of Republicans supported Medicare reform, and only 10% of Republicans supported Social Security reform. And Donald Trump got elected saying, we're not going to touch Social Security and Medicare. And the Republican Party has since become more populist and grayer and older and more attached to these spending programs. And so the Paul Ryan wing has kind of been driven out of the party. And the GOP of these days is a bigger government party. You put all that together, Republicans aren't going to talk about this. I'm not defending Republicans. I think it's cowardice, but that's where they are.
Okay, so that brings me to a question, and I've made this point on several shows before, and that is, what role do voters play in this stasis and this inability to address our debt and deficit problems, and that they aren't giving lawmakers the space, the leeway, the attention that they need to talk about, here's the problem, here are some solutions?
Yeah, I mean, we need a Ross Perot. I'm dating myself. Ross Perot ran for president in 1992, and he held up charts about deficits and debt and unsustainability. We need lawmakers who will actually talk about it and educate the public. Because if the public doesn't understand it, they're not gonna push lawmakers to reform it. You need lawmakers who will actually do public education on this. And then from that point, you need voters who will demand tough choices. Voters talk a good game on deficit reduction right after they're done talking about why they need their tax cuts and spending hikes. Ultimately, the voters have to push for this. What scares me is I don't think voters are going to get motivated to care about this until we already have some sort of fiscal or economic crisis. It's going to take that to probably wake them up. And the difficulty is once that happens, it's too late to fix easily. It's kind of like saying, I'll start worrying about global warming after temperatures have already hit a certain point and caused a certain number of damage. It's a lot easier to fix it earlier than to wait until the problem is already started. But we need lawmakers to do public education, and we need voters to think long-term on budget, just like a lot of them like to think long-term on issues like climate.